welcome to a new Technique Thursday video. Today I'm making the card you can see here, and I'm going to try some sort of resist technique today. And I'm going to use the distress inks and a lot of water, so I am going to use watercolor paper for this. And I'm using the distress watercolor paper from Tim Holtz, which are already cut to a good size for all of you that make standard A2 cards. But since I make cards according to the European standard, my card base is a bit taller and not as wide as an A2 card in America. So I need to cut this watercolor paper to make it fit on my card base. And I decided to cut it so that I have a border that was about 1/4 of an inch wide all around the card. And then I also cut away a piece on the bottom in a diagonal line. I didn't really put any major efforts into the cutting thing, and I just eyeballed it and cut where I thought it might look good. And as I said in the beginning, I'm going to try some sort of resist technique, so I need to use a product that I know will resist the distress ink that I'm going to add later. But I didn't want to start adding any kind of paint or something that will give me a raised image, so I decided to try and use a very thin coat of matte medium. And I used the foam things from the ink blending tools to dab the medium onto the stencil. And the stencil I'm using is pretty intricate, and I realized that I had to dab the medium on instead of trying to do it in a swiping motion and brush the medium over the stencil. I did a test on the piece you can see on the left, where I did sort of drag the medium over the stencil, and I ended up getting a lot of medium under the stencil as well, which sort of defeats the purpose of having the stencil there in the first place. So by carefully dabbing the medium on top of the stencil, I got a crisp image, just like I wanted. When the medium had dried, I used my distress ink pad directly onto the watercolor paper and rubbed the ink all over the piece. And then I sprayed a lot of water on top and used a paper towel to wipe off some of the ink. And then you can see that where I've added my matte medium, the ink will come off really easy. And before the paper is dry, I'm going over it with some red ink as well. And then I'm adding even more water and wiping off the excess. I'm adding all of this water to make the ink soak into the paper and also to get a variety of shades and a bit of that watercolor feeling. The red ink did make lines that I felt were a bit too harsh though, so I went back in with the blue color again to get the red toned down a lot. And the watercolor paper absorbs the ink where I don't have any matte medium, and then when I add water on top, the ink kind of spreads to the whole paper from within, so to speak. And I do get some color on the paper behind the matte medium, but this is exactly what I wanted, and I think this gives it a more distressed and old look. If you want to have a super crisp image and make sure that the resisting parts are really white, you could use some sort of white paint that would resist the ink, or white embossing powder or something like that. The matte medium is transparent and will show whatever color is underneath, and therefore I get that blue shade where the paper absorbs some of the color. I'm going to add a banner on this card, and as usual I don't really have the energy to go and find a paper that will match my watercolor panel when I can just color the piece of paper with my distress ink. And I just happened to have cut off a thin strip of the watercolor paper in the beginning and decided to use that. So I colored that piece with the same color of distress ink, and then I also splattered some water onto it to get that nice watercolor look. And then I dried the piece with my heat gun. And then I cut the banner to the right size and used my scissors to cut out the V shape from one of the ends. And I adhere that to my watercolor piece using my tape runner. And I'm adding quite a lot of adhesive here since I have the textured side down, and it can sometimes be hard to get the pieces to stay in place with all that texture. And I found these two paper flowers in my drawer when I was looking for something else, and I thought they would probably have the right color for this card, so I decided to try and use them. I rarely use flowers on my cards, but I do have to try and use up all of those flowers I have laying around, so... Or maybe I should just make a big bag and have a giveaway or something. Anyway, I want to adhere the flowers with a brad, which is also another product that I never use. Brads are one of those things that were really popular when I started scrapbooking, and I ended up getting loads of them. And to be honest, most of them are still here after like 10-15 years, taking up way too much space in my craft room. I should just give all of my old stuff to charity or something. But yeah, about the brad that I'm using today, it's some sort of dark coppery color and doesn't exactly match this card. So I'm transforming it by adding washi tape in a teal color that will match. And then I'm folding in the edges of the tape, making sure that the tape on top of the brad is nice and smooth. And then I use an old nail file on the edges to get off the excess tape. Then I secure the tape with a thin coat of matte medium, and I have a brad that will match the rest of my card. And then I just make a hole in the watercolor paper where I want the center of the flower to be and adhere the brad like normal. And then I started adding some foam squares to the back of the paper, but I realized I had forgot to stamp my sentiment, so before I adhere the panel I am using a pen to draw a line where the panel is going to end. This way I know where to stamp my sentiment, even when the panel is not there. And the sentiment I'm using, it's called Beautiful Words, and it's from Simon Says Stamp. I got this in a card kit, but I do think it's still available, and I think it's a really nice stamp set, and I've used this one a lot on my cards. I stamped the sentiment in the same blue ink as I've been using for the rest of my card, and I do realize that I really need to stop making monochromatic cards, but I am useless when it comes to finding good color combinations, and I find using one ink is so incredibly easy. But I promise I will try and use more color combinations in the future. Then I am just adhering the panel to my card base, and the card is almost finished. As a final touch I added some blue stickles to the center of the flower and also a tiny bit on the inner petals. And that was my card for today. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to check out the supply list if you have any questions about the products I was using. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.